Is there an argument to be made that Gerald Durrell is, or was, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, writers of animals and animal behaviour? Or are his books now too steeped in outdated or problematic attitudes around colonialism and the capture and exhibition of exotic animals taken away from their natural habitats and environments? Let's look into it. Published in 1956, The Drunken Forest is a travel memoir documenting a 6-month expedition by Durrell to South America in 1954. Along with his wife Jacquie and some local experts, Durrell travels through the remote forests and marshlands of northern Argentina and later Paraguay in search of rare animals to study, catalogue and collect. Rather than focus entirely on the wildlife element of the story, the book offers an equal blend of nature writing and situational comedy, with Durrell mining the latter through vivid descriptions of the places and people he encounters as part of his trip. Over the course of the book, the author documents everything, from the arduous journeys he and his supporting characters take by land, sea and air, to the frequent meetings with the various spirited locals, who provide both valued assistance and comic relief. Here, the different language and cultural barriers between characters provide an often ironic counterpoint to the scenes depicting the challenges of capturing and caring for animals in the wild. The style of the book will be immediately recognisable to readers who are familiar with Durrell's celebrated Corfu trilogy. A trio of books detailing Durrell's childhood spent on the Greek island of Corfu, with the misadventures of his eccentric family and the larger-than-life supporting characters they meet along the way, provide a backdrop to the story of the young Durrell's growing interest in animals, insects, and the natural world. As with those books, the first of which, My Family and Other Animals, was published the same year as the book in question, what makes The Drunken Forest especially enjoyable is Durrell's enthusiastic, self-deprecating style. Even when things go wrong, as they often do, the author treats every setback with the same spirit of adventure, detailing and documenting his recollections of events with a healthy mix of fact and fiction, as his flair for storytelling, combined with his rich vocabulary and imagination, transforms even the most mundane of moments and interactions into scenes of spirited situational comedy, or something more enchanting in its genuinely awestruck exploration of anthrozoology. The result is an entertaining, informative, if sometimes chaotic story of wildlife and personal exploration, where the episodic vignettes and overarching narrative both illustrate Durrell's deep affection for the natural world. The Drunken Forest of the title refers to the Gran Chaco, or the Chaco Plain, which spans eastern Bolivia, western Paraguay, northern Argentina, and parts of Brazil. During an expedition to the region, Durrell encounters the floss silk tree, known locally as the palo borracho, which their guide Raphael informs them means the drunken stick. Here, Durrell writes, "And indeed the whole landscape did look as though nature had organised an enormous bottle party, inviting the weird mixture of temperate, subtropical and tropical plants to it. Everywhere the palms leaned tiredly, the professional bar loungers with their 2 long heads of hair, the thorn bushes grappled in an inebriated brawl, the well-dressed flowers and the unshaven cacti side by side, and everywhere the palo borrachos stood with their bulging beer-drinkers' stomachs tilted at unbalanced angles, and everywhere among this floral throng hurried the widow tyrants like small, slick waiters with incredibly immaculate shirt fronts." Throughout the book, Durrell's writing captures the small hymns of the animal world in tremendous detail, sketching scenes with vivid descriptions of sight, sound, smell and taste. Rich in both colour and texture, the imagery and atmosphere that he evokes through these descriptions, capturing both the mood of places and the temperament of characters, animal or otherwise, is always palpable, as this sensory aspect of his descriptions or of his use of similes or associations helps to situate the reader within the story and its setting. In his writing, Durrell sometimes transposes the more curious behaviours of his animal subjects onto associations of the more curious behaviours of human beings, which gives an added element of humour to the book, while also making these otherwise potentially academic expeditions accessible and engaging for the average reader. For example, discussing the habits of the biscacha, a native South American rodent which resembles a rabbit, Durrell writes, "Biscachas are the bohemian artists of the pampa. They are very free and easy in their ways, and their massive underground community warrens are generally filled with an assortment of friends who have moved in. Burrowing owls dig small flatlets in the side of the Viscacha's hallway. Snakes sometimes take up residence in the disused portions of the nest, presumably the Viscacha's equivalent of the attic. If the Viscachas enlarge their residence and several tunnels fall into disuse, a species of swallows immediately moves in. So many a Viscachera contains an odder assortment of types than most Bloomsbury boarding houses. The Viscacha's artistic inclinations are, I feel sure, more than slightly influenced by surrealism. The area immediately around the mouth of the warren is cleared of every vestige of green stuff, so that the front doors of the colony are surrounded by a ballroom-like expanse of earth, packed hard by the passing of many small feet. This bald patch in the middle of the pampa acts as their studio, for it is here that the Viscachas arrange their artistic displays. The long, dry, hollow stems of the thistles are piled carefully into heaps, interspersed with stones, twigs, and roots. Anything else that catches the Viscacha's eye is added to the still life to make it more attractive. Outside one Viscachera, I examined the usual pile of twigs, stones, and thistle stems, which was tastefully intermixed with several oil tin cans, 3 bits of silver paper, 8 scarlet cigarette packets, and a cow's horn. Somehow this whimsical display, arranged so carefully and lovingly out in the vast and empty pampa, made me feel a tremendous desire to meet a Viscacha on his own ground. I could imagine the portly little animal with its sad striped face, squatting in the moonlight at the mouth of its burrow, absorbed in the task of arranging its exhibition of dried plants and other inanimate objects. Such descriptions are often captivating, hinting at the hidden lives of animals in an amusing and magical way. Other encounters with other birds, armadillos, frogs, toads, toucans, storks, rattlesnakes, and foxes are all detailed in a similar manner, mining both humour and wonder from the peculiar rituals and routines of these animals, as Durrell and his associates try to learn more about their behaviour and their needs. However, it's here perhaps that we need to discuss the apparent elephant in the room. Obviously, for a book written 70 years ago, there will be elements of the story that have aged less well than others. One aspect of Durrell's work that I think is most uncomfortable for modern readers is this practice of trapping and collecting wild animals for zoological exhibition. Today, taking animals from the wild is generally seen as a last resort, reserved for carefully managed conservation projects only. In the 1940s and 50s, however, attitudes were of course much different. Wild animal collecting was a routine part of zoological study, and many zoos existed primarily to display exotic species, rather than to protect them. In reading Durrell's books today, aspects of a story like The Drunken Forest will inevitably raise some red flags when we think about the current realities of animal welfare and conservation. For instance, animals in The Drunken Forest are transported over long distances, handled in ways that would now be considered stressful or even dangerous, and are often kept in conditions that fall short of modern welfare standards. Yet the practices here reflected the accepted methods of the time. Durrell's own attitudes would eventually change in time with the modern world. In later decades, he would argue that zoos should justify their existence by breeding endangered animals, supporting field conservation, and educating the public, rather than simply assembling impressive collections for exhibition. Similarly, his later work with the Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust placed an increasing emphasis on improving methods of conservation and in creating environments that met the physical and behavioural needs of the animals in his care. So, while some scenarios in The Drunken Forest and other early books by the author might feel cruel from a modern-day perspective, Durrell's later work did, in part, help to push the conversation away from zoos as places of entertainment, and instead towards places of conservation, welfare, and the long-term survival of endangered species. However, other aspects of the book that come across as dated from a contemporary perspective are less easy to defend. Unfortunately, there is an element of Durrell's writing here that leans, perhaps unintentionally, into colonial exceptionalism. The way he writes about native characters can sometimes seem condescending, describing their appearances and behaviours in much the same language you would use to describe a wild animal. He's especially cruel in his descriptions of Paula, the couple's housekeeper in Puerto Casado, constantly remarking on the character's enormous size and comically large chest. This, combined with a couple of off-colour jokes, surprisingly attributed to Durrell's wife Jacquie, feel insensitive if not misogynistic by contemporary standards. Though it's less egregious here than in his Cameroon set novels, such as the Baffert Beagles from 1954, there is, nonetheless, a very pronounced sense of the master and servant relationship in how Durrell depicts and situates characters that are foreign to him, but otherwise native to the book's settings. A sense that he either sees such characters as noble simpletons connected to a more primitive or pure way of life, or instead as entirely subservient to the whims of these intruding Europeans, and as such acceptable subjects to be mocked and caricatured for our entertainment. That Durrell, who requires a guide and interpreter to be able to converse fluently, is mining humour from the broad accents and broken English of foreign characters, who are often speaking intelligently in a second or third language, reeks a bit of Western entitlement and xenophobia. One wonders what characters like Paolo and Raphael might have made of Gerald and his wife, crossing continents where they could barely communicate, causing disruption and chaos as they trap and study animals that the couple have very little lived experience of, had they themselves been in the equally privileged position to have their own recollections of these encounters detailed in a book of their own. Such elements obviously pose a barrier for a lot of readers. And again, this is something that each of us who chooses to search out and engage with works from different eras often have to rationalise, grapple with and discuss. Engaging with any piece of old media, whether it's a book, play, film or piece of music, is a bit like time travel. We're being asked to look at this ancient text, which holds and documents attitudes and opinions once considered acceptable, mainstream and commonplace, but from our own fixed perspective, shaped as it is by decades if not centuries of societal change. As we can't change the past or rewrite it, we can only reflect on it, learn from it, and hopefully move forward with a better understanding of why such attitudes existed, and why those same attitudes have since changed. Nonetheless, despite these dated or potentially problematic elements, I still enjoyed the book overall. As important as I think it is to discuss the more difficult or outdated aspects of a work, there is still much to enjoy in Durrell's writing, and in the more well-meaning and enchanting aspects of the story, which really do celebrate the wonders of the natural world. In terms of descriptive prose, Durrell is both a tremendous writer and a born storyteller. That he was known primarily for his arguably more important work as a conservationist, naturalist and zoologist means he isn't often spoken of as a writer first and foremost. As such, he isn't cited alongside other celebrated writers of the mid-20th century, such as George Orwell, Virginia Woolf, Kingsley Amis, Anthony Burgess, or even his own brother, Lawrence Durrell, whose Alexandria Quartet was a major literary success of the late 1950s. Durrell's ability to transport the reader through his ramshackle travelogues and through his vivid descriptions of exotic animals, their behaviours, and their relationships to the natural world, nonetheless mark him out for me as a genuinely great author in his own right, and as one of the better writers in terms of capturing the attitudes and behaviours of animals in the wild. And while there are those occasionally dated or problematic aspects to some of his earlier novels, they're likely no more dated or problematic than the more celebrated works of the authors aforementioned. This edition of The Drunken Forest really benefits from the illustrations of Ralph Thompson, which not only capture the animals discussed in stunning detail, but help to further situate the reader in the scenarios depicted. Thompson's illustrations bring so much to the story, complementing both its focus on depicting and celebrating these animals, which at times become genuine supporting characters in Durrell's story, and in underlining its sense of humour. But what do you think? Can we still enjoy the wonderful richness of Durrell's writing, with its evocative prose and dry sense of humour? Or is it more difficult perhaps to untangle the greatness of these stories from the more unfortunate attitudes and practices that they promote? As ever, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.